Great. I'm starting. Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Tegan Hansen. I'm the Senior Forest Campaigner at Stand.Earth. I'm joined by Rory Brogan with RSPB, Amanda Maxwell with NRDC, and Suparna Lahiri with the Global Forest Coalition. And we're here to talk today about the growing threat of biomass with carbon capture and storage and carbon markets, and how the negotiations at this COP risk locking us into a high-polluting, destructive future if we don't change course. So I'm here today from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, also known as Western Canada, and here at what has been called the Finance COP. But we cannot help wondering if it might more accurately be called the False Solutions COP. As important negotiations have stalled, we are left with pathways that risk locking us into this high-polluting future with dangerous distractions like big biomass. In the world today, over half of all renewable energy is bioenergy, and much of that is woody biomass. What that means is burning wood from forests or monoculture plantations, either in place of or often with coal, to generate energy. We know that burning woody biomass often generates as much or more carbon dioxide than coal per unit of energy. But because of flawed carbon accounting that's upheld here at the UNFCCC, as well as enormous subsidies, biomass has been touted as a renewable energy and is given enormous support to grow. So, of course, we maintain that this is an incredibly dirty and destructive energy source that should not be counted as clean and renewable energy. What is being negotiated here at COP29 could make this even more dire, and my co-panelists will speak to some of those other false solutions that come with biomass. We're also here this week with a new report from EPN's Biomass Action Network, which shows the level of threat that biomass poses globally. So according to this new report, between 2021 and 2030, we can expect to see a tripling of woody biomass supply for energy. This is predicted to come with a devastating increase from monoculture plantations of 13 times the current levels. And this comes after a 50% increase between 2010 and 2021, including a 250% increase in global wood pellet production to 47.5 million tons in 2022. Canada, where I come from, is the third largest exporter of wood pellets globally, following Vietnam and the United States. And we are already seeing the devastation that this sector causes in Canada. On Wet'suwet'en territory in Western Canada, I have sat beside wood pellet plants and watched logging truck after logging truck after logging truck unload whole trees freshly cut from primary forests. This is a daily occurrence. These pellet plants, which are now mostly owned in my home province of British Columbia by Drax, are supported by subsidies in Canada and outside of Canada. And we know that companies like Drax also know that they are sourcing from primary and even old growth forests in British Columbia. Most of the pellets from Canada are exported to the UK, to Japan, as well as Europe and South Korea to be burned for electricity generation. And this is coming at a time when we also know that these forests are the very thing that we need to prevent the worst impacts of the climate crisis. So the forests where I live in Canada are truly some of the most carbon-rich forests on the planet, thanks to millennia of management by Indigenous nations. We know that these forests are essential for the rights of Indigenous nations, they're essential for culture, for livelihood, and they're also incredibly biodiverse. And we're facing an extinction crisis in British Columbia and around the world, and our governments are still permitting and subsidizing the destruction of these forests. The last thing we should be doing is burning forests for fuel. But instead of addressing this clear problem, here at COP29, we're seeing negotiations further entrench support for biomass, along with carbon capture and storage and carbon markets, which are intricately connected. So we're calling on parties at the COP to exclude large-scale biomass from their renewable energy schemes, to stop subsidizing this sector, and we're also calling for parties to put forward a review of the carbon accounting flaws at the UNFCCC that have enabled this sector to be counted and misclassified really as renewable and clean. We have real solutions available. We know what they are. Support for this sector is fundamentally about supporting the existing infrastructure that has gotten us into a climate and biodiversity crisis. We can put forward real solutions that center Indigenous rights, the rights of local communities, and human rights, and keep us on a pathway for a livable future for our climate. And I think what we really want to enforce at this COP is that we simply cannot burn our way to a climate-safe future. And with that, I'll pass it to Rory.
Thanks, Tegan. Good afternoon, everybody. Rory Brogan from the RSPB. The threat map that was launched today is very clear. Supply of woody biomass is expected to triple by 2030 in the name of renewable energy, despite clear warnings that it can damage climate, nature, and people. Industrial-scale woody biomass, as we've just heard, burns and it emits more CO2 than coal at the smokestack. Yet, due to the UNFCCC's land use and forestry accounting rules, it's rated as zero carbon energy. This allows countries to omit biomass from their energy sector emissions, leading to billions of dollars going to the biomass energy companies in tax breaks and renewable energy subsidies across the world. This dependency on biomass risks locking countries into unsustainable supply chains, such as damaging logging practices, as well as energy targets, which rely on false solutions. One such false solution, which I'm going to talk about, is the development of bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, also known as BECCS. BECCS forms the basis of many promises to deliver negative emissions in line with the Paris Agreement. This is where crops or trees absorb carbon from the atmosphere and emissions are captured and stored when they are combusted for energy. However, given forest biomass is not carbon neutral, as we've just heard, BECCS cannot be assumed to be carbon negative. Even capturing some of the carbon does not offset the damage done to the forests and their carbon absorption. BECCS is unproven at scale, and its rollout will require rapid success of many new technologies and supply chains coming together. It requires massive inputs of forest biomass, land, nitrogen, phosphorus, water, and substantial CO2 and nitrous oxide emissions embedded within that supply chain. BECCS is also unlikely to deliver on its promises at the scale it's envisaged. In fact, even the International Energy Agency themselves has voiced their concerns that the technology is not on track. As well as being harmful to nature, reliance on BECCS could also lead to a slowing down of the fossil fuel phase-out, delaying climate action. Science shows that waiting on BECCS to come online could risk an extra 0.7 to 1.4 degrees Celsius warming, because the technology may never work. Is this really how we want to risk our futures? BECCS could also have huge impacts on land. The UK Climate Change Committee suggested that up to 6% of UK land could be used for bioenergy crops for BECCS by 2050, in addition to over 8 million tonnes of imported wood. If other countries follow suit, we are looking at a huge pressure on our land globally. Finally, BECCS is expensive. Drax Power Plant is the UK's largest emitter. It is also in the process of trialling its first BECCS system. Any eventual BECCS power plant, if ever built, could need £43 billion in subsidies over its lifetime. During a COP, where hard financial decisions have to be made this week by all countries, we cannot afford such dangerous and costly distractions which undermine our nature and climate targets. There is hope, though. We do not need to rely on future carbon removals from BECCS. The IPCC shows that we can limit our warming to 1.5 without BECCS by investing in energy efficiency, decreasing energy demand, and policies with far lower environmental risks and far more co-benefits for society. In the UK, restoring our ecosystems, we know, will play a huge part in achieving real climate action. A report by the RSPB and the WWF research, as well as a recent report from the NRDC, which Amanda will talk more about, have shown that in the UK, we can get to net zero with far less or no BECCS. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rory. Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda Maxwell with the Natural Resources Defense Council, or NRDC. As Rory said, I'm going to discuss some of the findings of NRDC's report on bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, or BECCS, called the BECCS hoax, which hopefully will add a little bit more detail to Rory's excellent comments. So our study, which came out just a couple months ago, looks at the UK's plans to use forest biomass to produce electricity in future BECCS power plants from 2027 to 2050. So we model carbon emissions and required land area during that time frame. The modeling estimates carbon emissions under 3 different scenarios for procuring the biomass, so each with different levels of clear cutting. So we have a high clear cutting scenario, medium, and then a no clear cutting scenario. And in theory, BECCS is supposed to decrease emissions by providing an overall removal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Instead, our results show that BECCS using forest biomass would actually slow the UK's progress to net zero and increase the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. This increase comes from 3 sources that are included in our modeling, but that are not typically accounted for example, by the industry. These 3 sources are reduced absorption of CO2 by forests, as forests are cleared and unable to restore that capacity to store and sequester carbon, the harvesting, processing, and transport of biomass, and the escape of some amount of carbon dioxide at the power plant, even with BECCS technology. In our study, we assume a capture rate of 90%, which matches the industry's claims, but I want to note these are actually quite conservative. So the results of our study in terms of climate show that BECCS will not be carbon negative, cannot offset carbon emissions from other sectors, and will not help the UK achieve net zero. Even under the no clear cutting scenario, which assumes the least intensive logging impact and really doesn't align with the reality of biomass sourcing today, BECCS was carbon positive. So in fact, when proper carbon accounting is employed, the cumulative emissions from BECCS alone could surpass the UK's total emissions from all other sources by the late 2040s. In terms of land requirements, over that 24-year period of the study, 2027 to 2050, producing bioenergy will require new areas of forest logged each year. So again, in the high clear-cutting scenario, the total land area required reaches nearly 7 million hectares. In medium clear-cutting, this rises to 13 million hectares, and in the no clear-cutting, almost 18 million of hectares of land will be impacted and degraded. These findings are significant not only in our efforts to fight climate change here at COP29, but also, as Tegan highlighted, in our need to halt and reverse biodiversity loss, which the world committed to do by 2030 under the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework. We know from experts and scientists all over the world, including the IPCC and the IPBES, that high ecological integrity forests are absolutely essential to successfully addressing the climate and biodiversity crises. This was evident at COP16, the CBD COP that was held just last month, where one of the notably few very positive outcomes was Decision 1622, which recognized the importance to climate mitigation and adaptation of conserving, protecting, and restoring biodiversity and ecosystem integrity. And it is also evident here at COP29, where similar texts are being proposed to reciprocate that CBD progress. And coordination among the Rio conventions, notably, is becoming widely accepted as an urgent priority. Just last year, the international community coalesced around the need to align climate action with the global biodiversity framework and to reverse deforestation and forest degradation like that caused by the biomass industry by 2030. Last thing I want to note is this is also an important issue of equity at the global scale. As others have mentioned, the UK demand for biomass is being met by forests in Canada and in the United States, which have for decades hidden behind myths that their forests are logged sustainably. We know this is not true. The UK's BECCS hoax is feeding on and driving that myth, risking global forest progress. In short, the best thing for climate and for biodiversity is for us to leave forests standing, and biomass energy, even with carbon capture and storage, does the opposite. Thank you.
Good afternoon. If we have to talk of Article 6.4 and how the offsets and carbon trading, how does it play into the issue of bioenergy and BECCS, we need to understand that the offsetting claims are being made in terms of three kinds of emissions: reducing emissions, avoiding emissions, and removal of emissions. So generally what we find is that bioenergy and carbon capture is generally referred to in terms of avoidance of emissions and removal of emissions. Now, bioenergy was already included in the Clean Development Mechanism portfolio for quite a long time. And how? Because what they claimed in those CDM projects is that a coal-fired or oil-fired boiler is replaced by a biomass-fired boiler. So what you get in effect is you are avoiding emission from a coal or oil-fired boilers. And there are lots of CDM projects around the world, right from India, Indonesia, I think Chile, Peru, where there have been a lot of projects which derived carbon credits from the use of biomass and into their boilers. So basically, that was one of the beginning of using bioenergy or burning of biomass as a kind of offsetting and generating carbon credits. But going into Article 6.4, which is basically removals, but it also includes in the text avoidance, emission avoidance. These are anthropogenic removals, and first of all, and that those include geological, ocean reservoirs, biological or chemical carbon dioxide sinks. And so to mention that in the supervisory body text, which is the recommendation of the supervisory body, it is clearly written that removal activity consisting of afforestation with fast-growing species with biomass feeding into bioenergy with carbon capture and storage is part of a removal activity as per Article 6.4. So it is very clear now in which direction we are moving into. There are two parts in this. One is the afforestation and reforestation, which are basically will be energy plantations which will be used as a feedstock to a bioenergy or BECCS plant. That energy plantation as a carbon sink can also be used as offsets at any point of time. And then this feedstock will be used in a bioenergy plant or a bioenergy and carbon capture storage, as is being used in Japan or proposed in Brazil. Because in Japan, there is already an operational plant in Mikawa, which is a BECCS plant, and it will use feedstock from palm oil kernel and wood chips or wooden pellets, and the carbon dioxide that is being emitted will be captured and stored in an ocean reservoir. So that's what is happening to BECCS essentially, and that's how they will claim that they are removing emission from the air. And then, so if you talk of avoidance of emission, let us go into, and that can also be part of the offsetting projects, like in Indonesia. You have co-firing. Now 57 coal-fired plants are being proposed to be co-fired, partly with coal and then with biomass. So what is happening is that coal, that unabated coal, becomes an abated coal as soon as you mix it with biomass. So it actually avoids the emission of a fossil fuel like coal, and then by using biomass, which is supposed to be carbon neutral or supposed to be a renewable. So that's how you are saying that I am avoiding, or we are avoiding fossil fuel emission. And so this could be actually, this could be at any point of time linked to Article 6.4 or even a clean air development mechanism as an offset project generating carbon credit. But the impact is really huge, because the studies in Indonesia that have been released so far, members of the Biomass Action Network, have showed that it can also lead to huge deforestation. And that deforestation is tuned to the projection is about 2.3 million hectares per year. And of course, huge impact on the communities. And so what we are really seeing is that the net impact of such kind of offsetting and carbon crediting in the name of either avoiding emissions or removal of emissions is not going to help, is not going to reduce, is not going to rapidly reduce emission that we need so. But on the other side, it's like burning of trees. You are generating credits by burning of trees. Nothing can be devastating than this, And of course, the associated impact, which is also huge on the communities, the forest communities, the farming communities. And so that's why I don't want to go into the broad what is there, what is not there in the current text, but from the very beginning, it's not the way. Carbon trading or carbon market is not the way to respond to climate action. And then, of course, bioenergy vitiates the whole thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. We have a few minutes for questions, if anyone has one.
Thanks a lot to all of you. I was wondering whether you have any figures with regards to the amount of subsidies these sectors receive, and as well as the amount of deforestation caused by this. Thank you.
Yeah, I can give you an idea about DRAX, which I spoke about in the UK context. So annually, DRAX receives £500 million in terms of subsidies. So that fluctuates. They are contracts for difference, so the agreement between the UK government and DRAX, and that's the same setup that is given to wind turbines and solar. So that's the sort of situation that is expected to skyrocket, as I described with BECCS, as it's the most expensive form of energy there is and has not decreased substantially, unlike other forms of energy. So that's my bit in terms of UK.
Yeah, I can give some figures that we got from Japan. A 4,000 megawatt bioenergy plant will get back about $20 billion as a payback of subsidies, I think, in the 20 years that they will operate. And then we have in Korea, South Korea, since 2015, their existing bioenergy sector has got a payback of about $4 billion.
Sorry, I'll just add one little piece of data from our report. A think tank called Ember released a study, and they found that a single Drax-Bex power plant could need almost 45 billion, I want to be clear, billion pounds in subsidies over the course of its lifetime.
And one last point from the new Biomass Action Network report. In Indonesia alone, implementing existing plans for large-scale bioenergy development could result in converting up to 10 million hectares of forests into energy plantations. There was another question. Yes.
If biomass energy is continued to be considered a renewable, do you expect it to scale up as a share of global energy production in coming years? Thank you.
I can speak a little bit more globally minded. I think there are some countries like the UK, for example, that are investing very seriously in bioenergy, particularly BECCS. I think, based on conversations that I've had just here over the past, several days, most countries, most developing countries, countries in the global south, most emerging economies are looking more towards truly renewable energy resources like wind and solar.
I know we're almost out of time. Biomass is already over half of renewable energy, and the projections that I have are not showing it going down if countries don't change course. And so I think that this is also an onus on global north countries like the UK that are investing heavily in bioenergy, where other countries are trying to go truly renewable. So this is a responsibility, I think, for countries like Canada as well to take leadership.
Yeah, I would just come in to agree with you, Tegan. I think that serves as a warning to global north countries that are trying to showcase net zero pathways. We need to exclude this harmful practice, and that will mean being a climate leader and taking action and investing in true renewables and nature restoration.
Okay, great. And we'll be available outside the room if anyone has further questions. Thank you.
Thank you.